Second World War pitched the United States against Japan in some of the bitterest fighting in the history of warfare. On both sides, thousands of lives were being sacrificed. America's answer was to develop a weapon so awesome that it would end the fighting almost at a stroke. Billions of dollars were plowed into ensuring that the USA would be the first nation in the world to have the atomic bomb. What the Americans did not know, and what many are unaware of to this day, was that they were actually engaged in a race. Their enemy, Japan, was also working on a nuclear program. Not one, but two teams of Japan's top scientists were engaged in a desperate bid to develop the bomb. They had completed the first crucial steps and may even have detonated a nuclear explosion. The Western Allies had no inkling that the Japanese program was so advanced. They did not know that with just a little more time, the course of World War II might have taken a very different turn. The Second World War ended when the United States used atomic bombs against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was so complete that the Japanese surrendered within days of the second strike. Although Japan was much criticized for its wartime brutality, it won universal sympathy as the victim of this terrifying new weapon. But Japan's scientists, unknown to the world and to America in particular, had set out to harness the same destructive force in a weapon of their own. Once defeat was inevitable, the Japanese set about destroying their military secrets. Orders were given for all evidence of scientific and weapons research to be burned. In those last frantic days before the arrival of the conquering Americans, mountains of papers and files from the bomb project went up in smoke. But one survived. In Tokyo, amid the chaos of surrender, a bomb team member handed the salvaged file to a brilliant young scientist named Kazuo Kuroda, a member of a different team.
He asked him to protect him, and he said, because your name is not on any of the documents, and so you wouldn't be prosecuted as a war criminal. Okay? And so he kept them, and he promised to take care of those documents.
After the war, Professor Kuroda emigrated from Japan to America, to the University of Arkansas.
He had come to the United States in 1949, one of the first group of Japanese scientists to be allowed to come to the United States after the war, and had come on a special visa, kind of a visa that the German rocket scientists came in under.
These are chopsticks, used like this.
Professor Kuroda often entertained students and colleagues at his home. Here, guests were shown an extraordinary document.
Is this hot?
It was on maybe one or two or three of those occasions that I, in fact, saw these secret plans to build the atomic bomb.
About Japanese atomic bomb.
Really?
Our bomb? Our bomb?
He would show them to students. None of them could read Japanese, but he made reference to the fact that had they been successful, it would probably have been used.
Remarkably, this explosive secret didn't escape from the Arkansas campus into the wider world. But after Kuroda's death in 2001, his widow decided to make his papers public. After nearly 50 years, Japan's most sensitive war secret was about to become public knowledge. How would Japanese wartime scientists, silent for so long, react to this new evidence? Yoichiro Nambu is a distinguished Japanese nuclear scientist who emigrated to the USA in 1952. Although not himself a member of the nuclear weapons team in Japan, he was their contemporary. Professor Nambu had not known that Kuroda's document existed.
I didn't know that they had this much information. Yeah.
The seemingly dead document suddenly comes alive when Professor Nambu spots the name of one of his friends.
Mr. Kigoshi, I knew Kigoshi myself. He's my fellow student in Tokyo.
Kuroda's document describes a team developing weapons-grade uranium and names Kunihiko Kigoshi as a member. Today, he's the sole survivor of those named in the papers. This is the first time he has talked of the project on camera, and the first time he has seen Kuroda's evidence.
How did you get hold of this? 彼がまたこれをどっからか入手したんだ。
Kigoshi's name appears prominently in the document.
その他ならばいいんです。
Other names should be written here as well.
僕一人の名前
Strange that only my name appears here.
ですね。
Cautiously, Professor Kigoshi begins to describe the project he worked on during the war. At first, he denies that weapons were involved.
まあ全くそういうその兵器になるということは全く考えてない。
In no way did I consider it a weapons project. All I could think of was the fact that we could extract energy from it. The military perhaps did think of using it either as an energy source or as something like bomb. But juniors like me knew nothing of these things.
その辺のことは私どものその下っ端の方には何にもありませんで。
The first atomic bomb program had been initiated by the military. In the spring of 1941, Tatsusaburo Suzuki, at that time a young lieutenant colonel, contacted the prestigious Riken Research Institute on the outskirts of Tokyo with a commission. The nuclear laboratory there was run by Professor Yoshia Nishina, a physicist distinguished enough that he had a commemorative postage stamp issued in 1990. Suzuki informed the professor that the Japanese army was commissioning him to develop a nuclear weapon. Nishina began assembling a team.
それで、実際に西名県で
Professor Nishina asked me just before I graduated
割合卒業間際になって西名
whether I wanted to join his lab.
俺のところへ来ないかと、来れば
He said that if I did, I might not have to join the army.
閉めたってんでくら替えをして西野先生のところへ行くことにしたわけです。
So Kigoshi became a member of the team. Among the faces in the Riken Group photograph of more than 60 years ago, another scientist, Professor Ryohei Nakane, proved to be still alive today. He is less guarded about the true nature of their project.
そうすると西野先生が原爆研究を
I was in my third year at Osaka University when Professor Nishina started the A-bomb project, and he recruited students who were studying nuclear physics, in particular isotopes. So when Nishina asked my supervisor to send one student from his lab, I was the one sent there.
先生に呼ばれて入りました。
Nakane was about to become part of a small and inexperienced team that had quite a job on their hands: build an atom bomb. The simplest way to build an atom bomb in the 1940s was to use uranium, but not uranium in its natural occurring form. 1 part in X thousand of this radioactive metal is of a slightly different form, known as uranium-235. If a quantity of uranium-235 is bombarded with a stream of neutrons, its atoms split with devastating force. A nuclear explosion. Kigoshi's job was to turn uranium into a gas so that the uranium-235 could be separated. Nobody in Japan had achieved this feat.
At first, I had no idea how to go about it.
Uranium gas is so corrosive that normal materials can't contain it. So even making the flask was a project in itself.
In order to make the brass solder, we made and tested many types of flaxes and solders. This produced all sorts of gases, and the workers who are conducting the tests would come up to me and say, "Are you trying to kill us?"
One problem was solved, but according to the document, the mixture was likely to be unstable.
It only exploded once. When it reacted, this thing broke and was blown off.
Kuroda's document and the scientists' reaction to it establishes that Japan was engaged on a nuclear weapons program in direct competition with the United States. But was it a real contest? Could a small group of Japanese scientists compete with the massively resourced might of the Manhattan Project? In America, the secret Manhattan Project was spending its way through the equivalent of $30 billion in its quest to develop an atomic bomb. It employed 130,000 people working at full stretch. Could the Japanese, with their much smaller resources, possibly have been making comparable progress?
The Manhattan Project of the United States was unprecedented in its size and scope and could only have been successful because of its size and scope and the enormous amount of resources dedicated to simultaneously developing several unknown, very complicated engineering projects.
The Japanese project was tiny by comparison. Kigoshi's staff could be counted on one hand.
The project didn't have tremendous support in the beginning because it was going to be something that they knew was going to take several years, if not more, and they thought the war was going to end soon, and it didn't have really the support.
But whatever the odds, the team did make steady progress. Their goal was achieved, and the gas reproduced, as Professor Kigoshi can finally admit.
I did not think that something like this document would emerge. It says that it was finally made.
Their resources may have been less lavish than the Americans, but their scientists were first-rate. Nishina had been a student of Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, where he was very highly regarded. In addition, the Japanese scientists were driven by extraordinary zeal. And as the war began to go against them, desperation. For the Japanese, defeat was unthinkable. Most would do anything to avoid such a humiliation. Not just the military, but the scientists were rooted in the century-old tradition of the samurai warrior code of honor and loyalty.